as I say, my second ever podcast episode, World War III Starts in Iran, specifically was revolving around the comments that Putin was making at the Munich Security Conference in 2007, warning the Bush administration at that time about going into Iran and that kind of red line. And if you do that, game on, essentially was the message that was being floated at that time. Well, we've just seen an actual U.S. strike on Iran, and so far Putin has been clear that there will not be a military aid response at this point. And perhaps that would change if there's a regime change operation, like an active military operation to assassinate Khomeini or what have you. But at this point, we haven't seen that. And China so far has been extremely guarded in its statements, just saying the sort of diplomatic mealy mouth speak that you would expect of, war is bad. We shouldn't have war. Like, okay, great. But what are you going to do about it? Apparently, at this point, nothing. It's interesting at any rate, because I've been listening for years and years and years and years to this crowd of people, a lot of whom I think are probably on a payroll of a government or two, screaming about BRICS are the saviors and they're going to save us from these crazy neocons and Israel and all of this crazy NATO foreign warmongering. And so far, the BRICS have been utterly silent about what's going on in Iran, and Russia and China have not stepped up to the plate. So it does beg the question of what would actually be necessary in order to really generate some sort of actual military resistance against this. Certainly not what we've seen so far, I guess.
Yeah.
But I think the real calculus is the point at which, for example, China decides, you know what, US is involved enough in Israel or in Iran and all that brouhaha. Why don't we take Taiwan? And Russia says, okay, we're going to go, and no special military operation. We're just going to go and take Kiev. And India is looking at it and says, okay, now it's on with Pakistan. That is the point at which it becomes World War III, not because of any one of those particular actions, but because the general calculus is now's the time, the window of opportunity where we can get what we want, and it just becomes this snowballing event. That's, I think, the real danger of events like these, is that they can start that snowball rolling down the hill.
That's a very interesting trilogy right there. Let me pose this to you. Do you think Trump, Putin, and Xi Jinping could get together and say, okay, Xi, you get Taiwan. We're not going to mess with that. Putin, you know what? Take Ukraine. That's that. And then we're going to implement regime change in Iran, and then Iran becomes ours. I mean, gosh, could they divvy it up like that?
One could imagine such scenarios. Let's put it this way. I could very much imagine Trump sacrificing Ukraine, like, hey, you go take Ukraine.
Yeah.
But the Taiwan thing is much, much more difficult, I think. I don't imagine that Trump would have any interest in allowing Taiwan to be taken, because, of course, it is the semiconductor industry essentially is there. And if China takes that over, it is game over for the international electronics, and everything that runs on electronics would be beholden to the Chinese communists. So I think that the price of that would be much, much higher. Having said that, there are people floating the idea that Trump is trying to do a reverse Kissinger. And in order to set that up, you have to understand that Kissinger, really on behalf of Rockefeller, but anyway, Kissinger, of course, did the famous, well, the not famous, the secretive trip to Beijing in 1970 before Nixon went, of course, famously to meet Mao Zedong. It was Kissinger who went the year before in a secret meeting that was not revealed until decades later to sort of pave the way for that. And the calculus at the time was, we can rip Beijing away from Moscow in the Cold War. We can bring them into our team. And so that there's the Sino-Soviet split. We're going to widen that split so they're not collaborating with each other. It's the great game of geopolitics. Well, now the idea is, is Trump trying to do a reverse Kissinger, basically take Moscow away from Beijing? Because, of course, Moscow and Beijing have been getting closer and closer in recent years, realizing that they're being surrounded by NATO. It makes sense that they would collaborate more. But if Trump can sort of get Russia more on board with the US and placate him in Ukraine or whatever needs to happen, then they can concentrate on the real problem, many in the Trump regime would put it, which is China.
Okay.
Maybe I'm biased because I'm here in the Asia Pacific, sort of with a front row seat to it, but I think the US-China is at the very least, the Cold War 2.0 for the 21st century, if not the real World War III of the 21st.
Okay, no, I totally get.
Want the full truth? Watch the full Deep Shallow Dive interview next. And hit subscribe if you're done with talking points and ready for clarity.